Welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today is the 6th of July, and it's a real honor to have with us from the South Clip Nation, First Nation Chief Don Tom and Adam Olson, the deputy leader of the Provincial Green Party. Today we are going to talk about a new project proposed to be done in Malahat, LNG project. And just to start immediately with the subject, I would like, it will be great, Chief Tom, if you tell us or outline to us what is the matter with this new proposal LNG project.
Well, from day one, when this project was announced, they had no prior contact before the announcement of the project. And you would think with a big proposal such as Steelhead's, a floating LNG facility, subsea pipelines, that they would be in touch with us. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And they had announced it in Malahat without prior talking to Sartlip. And you know, we take that as it's a great deal of disrespect when you do business that way, and it's not how we conduct ourselves in our territory. And so from day one, it's always been trying to play catch up on what their announcement is, and you know, it just didn't. I don't think those. When they make those types of announcements, that they're inclusive of First Nations, and that they're not, to me, they're looking out for their best interest, and you know, it's very clear that day.
Mm-hmm. You know, if there was something to add to that, I would suggest that Steelhead came out with a significant part of their messaging around how they are, you know, a great company working with First Nations, and this was, you know, this is part of the provincial LNG rhetoric, is that, you know, if you're working with First Nations and good partners with First Nations, and, you know, to be clear, they had no clue. Yes, they had a First Nations partner across the Saanich Inlet, but I don't think that they had a full understanding, the context of the Saanich territory, the relationships, the interfamilial relationships across the inlet. They didn't understand the historical context. They spent no time communicating with the other four Saanich First Nations on the Saanich Peninsula. They had very little understanding about the Douglas Treaty, which, you know, we might want to get into in a little while. So they were strong on rhetoric and weak on understanding. And I think that you know, it took us just a few minutes to really see that they were willing to talk the talk, but completely unwilling to walk the walk.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about the disrespect, if we can go more about that, disrespect, in, as you mentioned, in regard to the historical tradition, to the Indigenous people, the culture, and the as you mentioned before in other interviews, it's about the Douglas Treaty. It's not just to protect the Indigenous people and also their way of life, like the impact on water. So just to talk more about that disrespect, and more just for viewer to know what exactly we mean here.
Well, I think, as Adam had said, you know, if I think Steelhead had done their homework, they would have realized that bringing an LNG facility this close to, I think, within Douglas Treaty territory is a wrong place, because our rights are established here already. It's legally binding. You know, our rights have been affirmed and recognized at all levels of the courts and federal Supreme Court. And so it's the disrespect, I think, comes from that, you know, our livelihood is based around the Saanich Inlet, and, you know, much of our food comes from the sea, and, you know, they call us saltwater people because, you know, our primary sustenance and livelihood was on the water. And when you, I think, when they put forward a proposal such as the floating LNG facility right across the waters from us, I can see it from my office. Mm-hmm. And you know, that jeopardizes our way of life, and that would jeopardize absolutely our families who go out and harvest clams and go fish for cod, and the chum salmon that return to Goldstream every year. This is our livelihood. It's our way of life. And so when somebody comes in and announces a proposal, and without any prior contact, without being in touch with us, and I think being so close to home, our community was up in arms. Our elders very right away said that, gave me the mandate to say unequivocally, no way will we ever support this proposal. And I think it's a reckless proposal and dangerous proposal. The Saanich Inlet only flushes out once a year. So anything that's in that Saanich Inlet is in there for the whole year, and it only flushes out once a year. And it's a very sensitive aqua environment. They've been studying the Saanich Inlet for many years, and it's unfortunate the way they're going about doing their business. And our Douglas Treaty rights, and I want to say that our rights are established prior to Douglas Treaty. That I always say, it was apparent to James Douglas that we occupied and used these lands and waters when he came here. He didn't give us those rights. Those rights were established prior to him coming here. And we call that our Chilangan, and that's our birthright. Our birthright connects us to the land, it connects us to our ceremony, connects us to the things that we belong to, and that includes the land and water. And so we know through our connection to the Creator that this is our right to live as the Creator intended us to in the Saanich Inlet and within our territory. And it's
an obvious conflict here between, it seemed like obviously a clash between somebody see the land as industrial territory, and now you're telling me about this, all the other side of the equation.
Well, I think looking at how they do their business as well, they came into Malahat when Malahat had an interim chief. And I couldn't imagine a proposal coming forward to Sartlip and having myself sign off on it just alone by myself without a council. To me, that's, again, it goes to disrespect. And, I think it doesn't say much for Steelhead, and coming in and looking at a community who has an interim chief and announcing and signing and moving forward. It's just unfortunate the way I think the proposal was announced, and the way that Steelhead had announced it and approached Malahat as well. But and I think the characterization of Bamberton as an industrial site is just absolutely wrong. We look at it as Yas. It's always been a place of healing. It's always been a place of refuge, and that's what it's always been for us. And that includes Bamberton. And we look at the watersheds that come out from Malahat, and there used to be so much clams in front of Bamberton. But after the industrial site came in, some of the watersheds were changed, and a lot of the shellfish that had been there previously died off. And so we've witnessed through time how our Saanich Inlet has deteriorated. And it's really important that because it's everything that happens on the land affects the water and affects the fish, and it affects the harvesting that we can do, the harvesting that we do. And so it's a chain reaction, and those are the concerns that we have with this project is if they're going to be pumping heated water back into the inlet and heating the inlet, or because the likelihood is that they're not going to use electricity for the entire cooling process. There is a high likelihood that they're going to be burning their own liquefied frack gas. So there's many concerns that we have, and not only with the environment, but our Douglas Treaty rights acknowledged by the Crown says that our rights are unqualified, and that I'll take Saanich Bay Marina case for an example. When a proponent wanted to put in a marina in Saanich Bay, and the Saanich communities and Sayout didn't agree with the proposal, and we did go to court against the proponent, and the ruling was that our rights aren't just in the practice of fishing, our Douglas Treaty rights to hunt and fish as formerly, that it protects the aqua life and it protects the environment so that it will be maintained and preserved for us to hunt and fish as formerly. So our rights are established in the water itself. And we say that the inlet is treaty waters. And the proponent in the Saanich Bay Marina case had wanted to take out eelgrass and say that it wouldn't affect the environment. And we had proven that, yes, taking out eelgrass is important. It would jeopardize, the aqua life in the Saanich Bay Marina, or Saanich Bay. And so, the same would apply over just around the peninsula into this Saanich Inlet, that, the underwater life, aqua life, it's important for us to ensure that it's not only there for my generation, but for future generations.
I think part of the reason why when the announcement was broken, that this announcement was going to happen, that we were up there at that announcement back on August the 20th, was because along with the rights that Don has talked about, the establishment of the rights before, Douglas's recognition of the rights that the Saanich people were here, there comes a high level of responsibility that we've been taught growing up, that we have these rights, but we also have a responsibility to Saanich. We also have a responsibility to the territory that, hundreds, if thousands of generations of our families have lived and harvested and been, I would say, caretakers, but been a part of the food, the web of life in Saanich. We have a responsibility to stand up for that place, for our place. We have a responsibility to protect it when it's threatened. And so the activity of going up to the announcement and taking the position that we took from a very, very early on stage was an expression of that, and of that understanding of the responsibility that we have to look after and care for and cherish the place, and to love the place of the emerging people that we are descendants from, our ancestors. And so I think it's an important thing to point out that relationship that we have with the place, and that part of the disrespect, part of the answer to the question there would be that the company took no time to understand the intensity of that relationship. They took no time to understand the offensiveness, like how offensive it is to suggest that Yos, a sacred mountain with creeks that have been used by our relatives and our ancestors for thousands of years for very important things, is an industrial site. It's been an industrial site for less than 100 years. And actually, the industrial activity on that site has been a sore point not only for the Indigenous people of the Saanich Inlet, but it saddens non-Indigenous people that have lived in Brentwood Bay and in the Saanich Inlet for decades. They look at that and remember the salmon fishery, they remember the clam harvest, they remember the seafood harvest that came out of that place. The Saanich Inlet was one of 2 or 3 reasons to come to the greater Victoria area. You came to visit Butchart Gardens, and you came to fish in the Saanich Inlet. And the fishery there was year-round, and it was a phenomenal fishery. My father was a guide fisherman. Our people have been, my grandfather tells the story that you could walk across the backs of the salmon to our relatives in the Malahat. Those are the stories that were told about the vibrancy of that fishery. So when you have an industrial operation like this from literally, a corporation made up of people who are completely foreign to any of this information. They're foreigners to the territory, and they come in with sharp elbows, and they're propped up by a government that has gone completely, in the BC Liberals, and an opposition that has really provided no opposition to the LNG. So they're provided this shield where they can come in to a neighborhood like Saanich, or a neighborhood like the Saanich Inlet. They can make their proposal. They can be completely unswayed by any of the discussion points or arguments or information that they're given. They just put their head down. They just push forward. And then the number one goal, of course, is to get their project description into the Environmental Assessment Office, because once it's in there, then it's in the hands of the government, and a government that has basically doubled down and tripled down and quadrupled down on this industry, which is very unlikely to happen. And so no matter the information that's provided through our chief or through our elders, it doesn't seem to have any impact whatsoever, because the political climate is to completely support an LNG industry, even in a place like the Saanich Inlet, surrounded by people with incredibly complex relationships between the Indigenous people in the area. The non-Indigenous communities that are there there's thousands of people that live around the Saanich Inlet. There's thousands of people that live on the path of the tanker traffic. The Salish Sea is an incredibly sensitive ecosystem to be putting a natural gas pipeline through. The reality of this project is that we are being faced with what appears and what feels like an impossible situation. The company is pushing like there's nothing going to stop them. I don't see politically that there is much stopping them right now from continuing to push forward, and they don't actually have to show any respect to the neighborhood. It appears that they can, because a lot of the information that Don just shared and that I've shared, they knew about in that first week. I had many conversations with Steelhead officials. They've known about this, and I don't think that they've changed their behavior in one bit. They want to get an approval, and they're putting their head down, and they're spending an awful lot of money. And I think that the assumption that this is going to go through without any challenge, after the fact, is wrong-headed on their point. And the fact that they think that they can put an LNG facility like this, and part of the Saanich Bay Marina case is that you cannot impede a fishery, a Saanich fishery. We have the right to unimpeded access to the fisheries. Well, a large floating LNG facility with ships coming and going every 3 to 5 days, it is a significant challenge for them that they are unwilling to even address.
And I can see clearly on top of that there is exaggeration of the economical benefit will come when they talk over and over about the 200 full-time job. But obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of businesses will be affected by that. Economically, does not make sense for other businesses, local businesses, and more important to the ecosystem, which in the end, it's economical issue in the end. This is who will define our life. So this is issue all push aside, and we have the media talking over and over about 200 full-time job.
Yeah. So I was interviewed early on, and by one of the local television stations here, and the reporter, the feeling that I got from the way that the reporter framed the question was that because I was in opposition to a floating LNG facility in the Saanich Inlet, then I must be opposed to job creation, which is a completely absurd notion. It's absolutely absurd. It does not critically analyze, if you bring 200 LNG jobs into the Saanich Inlet, what will happen to the tourism jobs that already exist there? What about 100 years of tourism in the Saanich Inlet, for an example? We've got a massive tourism operator right there that that could be negatively impacted, that probably would be negatively impacted. There's tons of potential for other tourism opportunities in the Saanich Inlet. So what about those jobs? I mean, the way that the entire thing has been framed, and it's been, you know, Steelhead has done a good job. Those were the first words out of their mouth. Hundreds of millions of dollars of economic benefit and a couple hundred full-time jobs. You know, they have been very clear on what the economic benefit, like in those two economic benefits were. Mm-hmm. They've been extremely unclear on what the environmental and social impacts of that. I mean, they're not willing to have those discussions. They have got a lot of information, they just haven't shared it yet. They'll share it all at once. But you know, it's no good bringing 200 jobs into an area that has 0 LNG jobs at this point. And so you're introducing a brand new, highly industrial, highly pollutive industry into a place that is basically designed for tourism. It's designed for that kind of recreational activity, and not talk about the economic impacts, the negative economic impacts that it'll have. One of the biggest industries on the Saanich Peninsula, right, is real estate. You know, people come and retire on the Saanich Peninsula, just no question about that. What impact, other than a really hot real estate market in British Columbia right now, what impact does that have? You know, I guarantee that none of the people on the Saanich Inlet who live on the waterfront thought, you know, this is going to be a highly industrialized area with dangerous LNG facility and carriers coming in and out. So, you know, they're pretty skilled at giving the information that they want people to hear, very skilled at deking the information that they don't, you know, ignoring the information that they don't want to answer. And that's basically the way we've been treated from day one. And frankly, it's not the kind of interactions that I want from a future neighbor, I can tell you that.
Chief, Tom, I have kind of maybe a little bit tricky question here. Do you think, I feel when they come to talk to one nation only, seem like they are setting up kind of a conflict between this nation and the other nation around. Like when they talk in the news with you in the radio about, like kind of that Sartlib nation is kind of against the benefit, economical benefit will come to the Malahat nation. A kind of a setup conflict I see here. Right? What do you think about that?
Well, I think, you know, we've made it very clear from the beginning, our issue isn't with our relatives in Malahat, and we are not at odds with them. We are at odds with Steelhead LNG, and because the way they conduct themselves, the way they conduct business, and I think trying to go down to talk about economics, potential economics, to me is a rabbit hole. You know, our concern is our, you know, environment. Our concern is protection of our rights. Our concern is the risks and dangers that come with a LNG facility, the risks and dangers that come with subsea pipelines, the risks and dangers that come with tanker traffic. I mean, those are the things we're concerned about. And those are the issues that we have, and that's what we're opposed to. And so it's, to me, it's, you know, the dangers that would come into our inlet, and, you know, the earthquakes that we potentially would have here, and, you know, an underground pipeline, and you know, the dangers of a leak in a tanker. You know, a lot of our community members are out on those waters, and that could mean that they are instantly frozen. And so there's many risks and dangers that come with this, and we've made it very clear that we're not at odds, and our issue isn't with our relatives in Malahat. They're looking out for the best interests of their community, and equally, I'm looking out for the best interests of my community. And it's unfortunate that you know, they talk about economics, and to me, it's a rabbit hole because they're taking the conversation away from what we're actually concerned about.
Well, please.
I mean, I would just add to that I completely agree. It is a rabbit hole, and the questions that, because none of it is substantiated by anything. When you ask whether or not they pitted one nation or one First Nation against another, I'm not, and I can't speak for them, but I don't get the impression that they intentionally did it. I get the impression that they didn't do their homework, that they didn't clearly understand, or that they didn't get all the information. So I'm not going to make excuse for them. In fact, the last thing that I want operating in my backyard is a highly industrialized project where the operators seemingly did not do their homework on the relationships of the people that live in that. It shows, to me, a lack of due diligence and understanding. And if it's not that, then it's a complete lack of respect, going back to the first question that you asked. So, you know, I think that all the way around in this instance, yes, they do have very close relatives now in an extremely difficult situation, a completely unfair situation. And I think that part of it is this corporate desire to push forward and capitalize on a commodity. Part of it is irresponsible provincial government, and a lack of consistent and strong opposition to really flush out what this industry is about. Because we've been now talking about this industry for about 4 years. We were promised by our government the first plant would be open in 2015. We're a long way from that now. There's not even a final investment decision. They're proposing projects in highly sensitive areas, like on Leilu Island, where the biggest salmon fishery, one of the biggest salmon fisheries on the west coast, and in a place like the Saanich Inlet, where there's, like I said, incredibly complex First Nations relationships, in addition to a highly populated urban environment. It's insanity, really, is what it is.
So even if we go with that greedy mind of capitalism, it seems obviously internationally it's not really a good business in the end. Competing like with other states like Russia, Qatar, or in the business of LNG.
Well, it depends. I mean, I've read information. I've read arguments for both. I mean, when you're competing with Qatar, take for an example, they have natural gas, from my understanding, is a byproduct. They're drilling for oil. Natural gas, it comes up, and they decided, well, we can now capitalize this project, and they own the entire supply chain. There's other articles that say, well, it's better that, and depending on what your perspective is, I guess that the Canadian model, where we've got multiple interests, basically several middlemen from the time that it's fracked to the time that it's burnt, at its final destination, that's also a good model. I would suggest that whenever I read any articles in international media about LNG, British Columbia has never been mentioned once. I've been following the LNG file since the last provincial election in 2013, when all of these promises were being made to us. And British Columbia is a complete, it's not even an afterthought. It's not even a thought when it comes to the global LNG market, never mind, the complete steep decline of the price of LNG on the international market. So, I think we're chasing a sunset industry. We're way behind. We're way behind on it. Other areas around the world, other countries are way far ahead of us on this, and we've got some of the biggest industrialist people in the country, in Canada, talking about how this is a sunset industry and we need to start thinking about how we're going to power a 21st century economy. And so, we're just chasing last century's technology, and it's a dirty one. It's not good for our environment. It's unsafe, and it's causing serious social problems.
Chief Tom, when you talk whether with the official from the state or with the company, what their reaction and to the concern you just mentioned?
Well, we've had Steelhead come to our Chief and Council meeting, and the questions that we asked, the typical response that we had from Steelhead is we're too early in our process to give you an answer. And so a lot of our questions go unanswered, and so they say they want to engage with First Nations, and at the same time they don't provide answers that we're looking for. And I want to say that, you know, coming out of the Harper era, the Harper regime, where he's, you know, watered down the environmental protected areas, and I think he's taken an old approach in saying that, you know, we can just bulldoze over Aboriginal rights and title or treaty rights, and that, you know, First Nations just have to live with what we're doing. And you know, the courts seem to be changing. The tides are turning. We look at the Chilcotin decision, you know, where for the first time ever, First Nation has been granted title. And, you know, out of that, it had said, you know, whether it's government or industry, they have to go and acquire free, prior, informed consent from the First Nations. And that's a different threshold from just consultation. Consultation, I think, has been watered down by the Harper government, and I think the Christy Clark government followed suit with that, and hoping that she could ride on the coattails of that type of attitude. And so, you know, the court cases that are overturning, we just had a recent court of appeal that overturned a decision. And so, you know, the courts are recognizing that government and industry aren't meeting the threshold of consultation. And here in BC, 203 First Nations here in BC, we are collectively moving away from consultation and moving towards consent. And I've said from the beginning that in order for this project to be successful, it must acquire Sartlip's consent. And we're not about to give that consent. And in terms of the province's role here, in March, we brought the Husanich chiefs together to publicly announce and stand in unity to say that we do not support this proposal. We stand together, and also to put the province on notice that they do not have jurisdiction when it comes to the continuity of our Douglas Treaty. That the Sandwich Bay Marina case said that, you know, the province does not have the jurisdiction to issue permits to a proponent for such as the Sandwich Bay Marina case. And so that equally applies to an LNG facility. The province has no business interfering with our Douglas Treaty and or approving any sort of provincial permits.
Actually, we have some statistic our show here, as you know, it's about the Indigenous perspective, but also from the local community around. It seemed like there was lately a poll about the issue, and 89% opposed to the project, 7.5 with the project, 3.4 they don't know about the issue. So obviously it seemed like everybody sitting on the other side from that project, whether we are talking about the Indigenous people or the local who everybody live in the area. So one issue you mentioned about, Adam, about the environmental assessment process. Who would take care of that process here?
So my understanding of it is that there's a number of environmental assessment. So there is a BC Environmental Assessment Office. Mm-hmm. And that's under the Ministry of the Environment, I believe. And so they and the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency deal with it from a provincial and a federal perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if there's going to be one process for both, or if each is, you know, in the past I think that there's been one process and then the BC Environmental Assessment Office deals with it and sends it to CIA, or Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, for their approval. There's also going to be a National Energy Board application that's going to be needed for the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Because it's an underwater pipeline crossing international borders. There's also going to need to be a FERC, which is in the United States. It's a Federal Environmental Regulatory Commission, I believe, out in the United States. They're going to have to also do this. So there's multiple layers of regulatory approval. Mm-hmm. I think that on one hand, the company, Steelhead, will build that up and say this is the most, look at all of these layers of environmental regulation that we've got to get through. And that's fine. So there's multiple layers of environmental regulation that they've got to get through. But when you take a look at the governments that we have in place, they're the ultimate decision makers. At the end of that, there's the executive director of the BC Environmental Assessment Office, is my understanding is how it works, will make a recommendation to go one way or another, but the ultimate decision to move on a project becomes a political one. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, the information can be there. And part of that process will be, the application will change throughout the process. So if, issues come up, communities speak, then they will attempt to make some amendments or conditions. They'll put conditions on that. The chances of a project, once it gets into the environmental assessment stage, actually getting put down, especially an LNG project where the government, and I mentioned this before in the interview, but it needs to be said, this government wants to approve these. It needs to politically approve these. It does not bring a lot of confidence into the environmental assessment. As the chief said, the federal government has watered down these environmental assessment processes. They've thrown out a lot of environmental regulation that was designed to protect the interests of Indigenous people, to protect the interests of Canadians and British Columbians, non-Indigenous Canadians and British Columbians as well. And the fact is that there's not a lot of confidence right now in these processes. Take a look at what the courts determined with Enbridge. As the chief said, the Enbridge ruling was just overturned. The order in council to approve it was done in advance of the duty to consult and the government dispensing its duty to consult. Well, if that case is if Enbridge wasn't good, then Trans Mountain Pipeline, another application that we've been a part of, that both Sartlip and myself as an independent intervener intervened in that, another industrialization project in the Salish Sea. That process wasn't good. This process has not been good. The National Energy Board approval of the gas export license, as Don's pointed out, there was never any contact that this was going to be anywhere near Saanich territory. And the NEB will say, well, it's only about whether or not we have enough gas. The problem is that they didn't, there's no consultation, there's no they're not forewarning the First Nations involved that this is a potential. So I think it comes down to, we might have different layers of environmental regulation and regulatory processes. I don't believe that the public, and from what I've seen, and that number 89% is much lower than the one, just in my head, I've met only maybe one or two people that have said, now, come on, you should take a look at this Steelhead LNG proposal. Mm-hmm. I run into people all across the political spectrum saying, just keep going, don't stop, keep pushing, please stand up for us on this issue. And so, 89% is a low number from my experience over the last year, but the people are not confident that the final decision that's going to be made is one that's made on the evidence and the evidence that's put forward. They're not confident in the evidence that's being put forward because it's being entirely generated by the company whose interest is totally vested in a positive outcome. So we, in essence, from a provincial government perspective, and the federal government should look at it as well, we need a strong regulatory and enforcement framework for environmental regulation to ensure that the interests of British Columbians, of Canadians, of Indigenous communities are being looked after.
Actually, this is the next question about this is building the opposition. Obviously there is already a clear opposition for such a project, but again, it does not look in the media as it is that opposition. So how can we strengthen this opposition, kind of to push the government in the end to do what the population or the community want? Chief?
Well, we have a great opportunity. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip was in Sartlip the other month, and he said, we have a referendum on this coming up in May next year, when we have the provincial election coming up. And, I think, that's where you have your say. If you're not satisfied and happy with the direction that the Clark government is going and how they're going about doing their business, and do they represent the best interest of British Columbians, we have the opportunity to, in this upcoming May, in the election. So, it's getting organized in your area. It's making sure that if you're opposed to this, that, be involved, and it's talking with your family about this. It's having a discussion at the dinner table. It's we're having a paddle on this upcoming Saturday in the inlet to anybody who would like to come and join us to paddle and show support and solidarity, and paddle together with one another and show our opposition to Steelhead. These are the kind of activities that our community is doing. They have the Paddle for Peace and regarding Site C Dam. So right now I see there's so much involvement in community, and I think from the Saanich Peninsula in particular, we look at the town hall that North Saanich had put on. We look at the town hall meeting that Elizabeth May had put on, and there was at Elizabeth May's town hall, I asked those who are opposed to this project, would you please stand with me? And I would say about 600 people stood with me in opposition to this project.
Wonderful. Talking of Elizabeth May here, it seemed when we talk about the NDP, for example, they are not that real opposition for LNG. So it seemed like the only opposition here we have, it's coming from the Green Party politically.
Well, now you're asking me to get political. I mean,
everything
fine.
is political.
That's fine. Yeah, and I've been political. But I would say that the answer to your question in general terms is yes. Andrew Weaver in the BC legislature has been consistent from day one, right from the last election. We've been consistent from the last election that this is not the future of British Columbia. Yes, resource extraction is going to continue to happen. Yes, we are continuing, we will continue to use fossil fuels to a certain extent as we phase out. The number one goal from our perspective is to start phasing out and to not be building billions of dollars worth of new infrastructure on a sunset industry, and one where the economics are just simply out to lunch, and the environmental impacts right from the fracking well through the piping, the escaped methane, fracked gas, methane coming out of the pipes, virtually no way to track all of the gas, the methane that's going into our environment. The earthquakes that fracking causes, that's been proven to cause, the pollution of groundwater. There are literally hundreds of reasons to oppose the establishment of a liquefied natural gas industry in British Columbia for the export market. There's hundreds of reasons to do that. And consistently, Andrew and Elizabeth have been the ones, the elected members, that are willing to talk about those reasons why we shouldn't. It appears that the BC NDP opposition has been very troubled to take a clear position on the environmental issues. We've had our MLA come out and support the position that First Nations took. But I would challenge him. What about the hundreds of other environmental and social implications that that are very clearly going to impact the neighborhoods within his riding about it? So good. It's great that he's taken and acknowledged the very significant and complex Indigenous rights and issues that are raised there. But we need to be taking a look at the whole industry and not pretending like that's the only reason. That's a very substantive reason to oppose LNG. It's a question that I'll be running in the next election. It's a question that the Liberal out on the Saanich Peninsula is going to have a very significant challenge with, and I would suggest that they will not be let off the hook on the fact that there are many, many reasons why this is the wrong project in the wrong place at the wrong point in our history. We need to be looking towards the future. We need to be looking at what kind of industries can we establish in this province that are going to benefit our children, and that our children's children are going to be able to stand on those beaches of Wasanich and look across and say, man, I'm thankful that our dads, our fathers and mothers and uncles and aunties protected this place for us.
And it's really astonishing that actually I have no reason to see the media around but as a cheerleader for these kind of project. Like, for example, the CBC wrote about it, about deal will create 30 years of revenue and 200 full-time job, say partners. And that in an article was titled say that Steelhead, LNG and Malahat First Nation reach deal over liquefied. Just recently, I think in a couple of weeks ago, but it's enough. Why, as they say in a big font, they are talking only about the 30 years of revenue and 200 jobs, and nothing mentioned about treaty, history, about this land, it's how it's important to Indigenous people in many aspects. So what do you think about the media role here, Chief Tom?
Well, the media is going to do how they want to report the story, and I think, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, they're looking for the interest of, I think, their viewership. I don't think there hasn't been too many. We've had local media cover our announcement, and but I think they've generally missed the message that we're trying to get across about our Douglas Treaty, about our rights that are established here, about our concerns, and in almost every case, it's always been, you know, First Nations oppose another First Nations, or you know, they write the story how they want to. For my part, it's just being consistent with my message, and being very clear where we stand, and being very clear why we oppose this project. So, you know, for myself, it's just about keeping that consistent message. And you know, I was privileged to have to speak on behalf of Wasanich at the town hall meeting, and you know, there are only snippets of that story that were covered in the general message that we put out there.
You know, I think that there's we could probably do an entire show on the status of mainstream media, the media in British Columbia and in Canada, and in fact around the world. Certainly a lot has changed over the past, you know, 20 or 30 years in the media. That aside, there's a lot of other avenues to get to communicate with people. So where, you know, the story would have gone out through the media in the past, and that's how everybody would have got their information. We've been communicating with thousands of Saanich Peninsula residents, people all around the Saanich Inlet. We started the Saanich Inlet Network. It's got about, you know, 700 or whatever number of people that are receiving a newsletter all the time. We've got a Facebook page that has people regularly posting on it and reaching out. We're putting messages on other Facebook groups around, so we're utilizing social media as a way to connect and interact with people. I think that when you see 600 people show up to Elizabeth's forum 2 days or 1 day after 500 people showed up for the District of North Saanich event, and many of those people admittedly are going to be the same people, but when you see that happening, clearly the message is getting out somehow. Now, there's still a lot of people on the Saanich Peninsula that don't know that this project is even happening. You know,
Especially
5% of the people in that poll, for example, didn't have an opinion of it. most of those probably didn't know that that it was happening, and that's true. But we've learned, that the Saanich Inlet, the communities around the Saanich Inlet learned. Part of the reason why I established the Saanich Inlet Network when I did was because I had heard the horror stories from being a part of the political discussion. I'd heard the stories of wood fiber, say for an example, over in Squamish, where the people around there were completely caught off guard. I mean, they only got engaged once the environmental assessment process was already in action. And many people who wanted to make comments were left with mere days to sort of formulate their arguments and their comments about how this project was going to impact them. So in hearing those stories, I realized that one of the things that needs to happen immediately, as soon as this project, as soon as the words LNG are uttered from a company's mouth like that, they take full control of the inlet. Like, it completely controls the discussion around the inlet. What kind of investments are going to be made, what kind of investments in the environmental stewardship of that place are going to be made, are now dependent on whether or not we've got this LNG facility. So for me, starting the Saanich Inlet Network very, very early on was critical, so that we could then get the awareness out there and start asking questions and keep the pressure on the company. My belief is that they were hoping to make the announcement, everything go dark for the next 12 to 13 months while they put their project description together, and then, out of nowhere again comes the project description, and the community hadn't been paying attention. Well, the Saanich Inlet, the people around the Saanich Inlet have been paying attention. The First Nations interests have been clearly expressed. There is well-formulated thoughts and ideas about what the people's position is on an LNG facility in the Saanich Inlet. And I bet that Steelhead never intended on that being the case. And so I think it is instructive that it ultimately, yes, there's provincial implications here. There's a provincial industry that our government wants to get in place. But ultimately, these issues are local. And it comes back down to organizing in your community, understanding your community, and building positive and strong relationships with people all across. It doesn't matter what political stripe or what party they vote for, or who they buy their memberships from, or where they go to church, or who they hang out with, or what sport they play. It's about building strong, resilient communities so that when issues like this come forward, you can pull people together, inform the community together as an exercise of the whole community. And then when it's time to voice what needs to be voiced, you're ready and prepared to do it.
And actually, I will add to that, hold media responsible for all of that, because simply what Chief Tom is just telling us, I had to go to search on the internet to receive this kind of information. Meanwhile, in my living room, the TV telling me mostly 90% of the time what Steelhead would like me to hear. So it's this is here the two standard that, again, why I said they act like a cheerleader for these companies, and the all side effects for fracking and LNG project, it's never mentioned on the media, and nobody know anything about it. It's just, again, about the good things about it, and plus the fact that these good things are not really good things in the end. So here you have multiple layer of deception. I don't know what to say it, but I'm not going to. Maybe I should.
I'm not going to go there with you. Actually, I think that there's substantially less people working in the media than used to be, with substantially more attention on the business that they're doing. I think that there's other avenues for us to get information and for us to create content and information. Now, you have to be careful about what you're consuming, because the journalistic standards of the past are not there. But I'm hesitant to really go after. I think that if you go out there, you'll find that media have been writing about the earthquakes caused by fracking. Media have been writing about the pollution caused by fracking. I think that part of the problem is that the volume on everything else has been turned up, and there used to be dozens of people that sit in the Victoria Legislature as the press gallery, and now there's just a small group. And the media has substantially changed over the last couple of decades, and so. But the entire media landscape has changed as well. There are many other avenues.
Chief Tom, we have with 2 minutes. Do you have anything else to say in regard?
Well, I think looking at it from our perspective in Sartlip and Husanich is that we look at the people who we are, and we are Husanich. And Husanich refers back to our flood story, where we had a flood here, and we took refuge at Llewellyn, known as Mount Newton, and you know, we've survived that. And looking at our language tells us that we call ourselves Huilnuch, referring to us as Indigenous people, Huilnuch people. But Huilnuch doesn't just reference the people who we are. It references, in the language, it says that we are the last created here. We are the last created here in Husanich. The Creator wanted us to be here. He wanted us to speak the language here. He wanted us to walk these lands, to hunt these lands, to fish those waters. And that's what we're going to continue to do, because we're the last people created here. And you know, that's how we look at our way of life, and that's how we look at ourselves as people. And so, you know, my message has always been is we are going to continue to hunt and walk these lands and fish these waters as the way the Creator intended us for us to live.
And I think anybody stand in solidarity with Indigenous people need to listen very well to this message and act to do something about it. Chief Tom, thank you very much for coming to the show. Adam, thanks a lot. And thank you very much for watching this show. And special thanks also for our volunteer and Shaw TV that make this show possible. Thanks again.